Welcome to this week's On My Mind. I just got back from teaching my 24th permaculture design course in 2017, just recently, and it was incredible. And in every one of these permaculture design courses, I share something with the class that's pretty personal, and I've had so much success sharing this information that I decided that it's time to put it into a video and send it out to the world. Now, a couple of disclaimers before I divulge this information. The information I'm about to give you may change your life. It definitely has changed mine. I'm going to share all of the gory details. I'm going to get pretty vulnerable with you guys. I haven't shared this with too many people, just people that come through our programs and that I have a relationship with. But I want to just put a few disclaimers on the front end. Namely, I'm not a doctor. And so you take this advice, with a grain of salt. And while it might seem like a divergent subject for me to be talking about, given that this is a permaculture channel or permaculture area, I don't really differentiate inner ecology, what happens inside of my body, from outer ecology and how I look at landscapes. So here it goes. You've been warned. I hope that this information helps you out if you're struggling with similar issues that I used to be struggling with until I figured all of this stuff out. So a little bit of backstory here. Firstly, when I was about 17 years old, I started having a lot of internal bleeding, specifically in my gut. And so it was pretty scary. I had every test known to man, at least in Western medicine anyways. And so that included a barium enema, that included a colonoscopy, multiple of both of those things. Super uncomfortable situations to be in. Luckily, it always came back negative, so there was never any cancer in my intestine. But it was great. While it was great that there wasn't cancer, there was never really any information about what was actually causing it. The advice that I kept getting was, well, just put more fiber into your diet, or drink more water, or stop drinking coffee. I tried all of those things, nothing really changed. And I lived with it for a really long time. And those of you that are living with this as well will understand how uncomfortable it is. It's not pleasant to use the washroom and find that all the time. And so I'm not one to just kind of sit on my laurels and not do anything about it. Some people might call me a biohacker. I don't know if I would go as far as saying that I'm a biohacker, but I definitely like to diagnose problems. And I can't live with something if I'm not sorting a problem out. And so I started doing tons and tons and tons of research. In addition to doing research on this problem, I also have been playing around with my diet for a long time. So I've been vegan, I've been vegetarian, I'm now fully omnivorous. Sometimes I tell people that I'm actually vegan, vegetarian, omnivorous, and carnivorous, and it just depends on the season. And I noticed that certain things in my diet did start having effects. In fact, sometimes the changes in my diet would actually exacerbate the issue, make it worse. And that really got me thinking about the fact that it was potentially a dietary issue. And so over the last 5 years, I've had 3 major insights which has completely changed my life. And the reason I'm sharing all this information with you guys is that it's not only changed my life, but I've had at least, I would say, over a dozen people now that I've shared this with. I've shared it with lots more than that, but at least a dozen of the people that I have shared it with have had similar issues. And the results have been unbelievable. I've had grown men come to me and cry because I've completely transformed their life. So in addition to transforming my own life, I've actually started having impact on other people as well, just by being vulnerable enough to share my experience and what I've done to solve this problem. So here it is. The first thing that I discovered, and this was through permaculture and specifically through the Humanure Handbook, which is a book on composting toilets, and specifically how to build them and how to run them, was that when you build a composting toilet, you can build it in such a way that all of a sudden you're able to squat. And so it turns out that 50% of North Americans deal with the problem that I'm discussing right now. And so it turns out that the toilet, the North American toilet, which gets you sitting down, I call it the porcelain pony or the throne, is the worst anatomical position that you can be sitting in order to use the washroom. In fact, what happens to your colon when you're sitting down on a toilet is it does a right angle turn just like this, and so you create an immense amount of pressure on your intestines, because what your intestines are trying to do is, with peristaltic pumping action, which is basically the squeezing of your intestines, it pushes your stool out so that you can evacuate what's inside of you. But when you put a 90-degree turn in there, what happens is it forces it around that 90-degree turn, which creates a lot of pressure on the inner intestine, and I think that's part of what causes some of the bleeding internally for people. In addition to that, it also slows down how quickly you can get rid of the stool, and so people end up spending 30 minutes on the toilet with their smartphone or a magazine or something, which is a type 1 error. You shouldn't be, if you have enough time to read your smartphone or your magazine, there's something wrong. And so using a composting toilet allowed me to get into a squatting position, which turned that right angle into a straight pipe, basically. And so that instantly at least halved, and in some situations more than halved, the amount of time I was on the toilet. So instantly that alleviated a whole bunch of pressure and pain, and had a dramatic impact on the bleeding situation. So that was great. And if you can't use a composting toilet or a humanure toilet, there's a great product on the market called Squatty Potty. Check it out on YouTube. There's a really funny commercial of a pooping unicorn. I highly recommend it. It'll be worth watching this video just to get that tip, and I'll put the link below. So that was insight number 1, and that had a huge impact on my quality of life and my medical condition. The second big insight came when I moved from a Paleolithic diet, which is basically very low carb, grass-fed proteins, fats, and lots of vegetables. And then I moved from a Paleolithic diet to a ketogenic diet, which is even lower carbs, lower protein, really high fat. And what I noticed was that on the days that I didn't eat enough vegetables and that my fat and my proteins were quite high, I would exacerbate the issue. And so I was already squatting, and yet certain food groups were either helping or removing the problem, essentially. And so that got me looking at this website, which is called Free the Animal, and there's a blog that I'll put a link to at the bottom here, called A Gut Microbiome Soil-Based Probiotic and Resistant Starch Primer for Newbies. I highly recommend reading this blog. What I realized after reading this blog was that, and this ties really nicely into the soil science that I teach in my permaculture design course, is that 99.9% of the DNA in our bodies are non-human. Crazy, hey? We're mostly non-human. And when you eat a ketogenic diet or a Paleolithic diet, or any diet for that matter, you need to be thinking about the 99.9% of the life forms inside of your body when you're making dietary choices. So you're not just eating for you, you're eating for all of those other dudes as well. And so what this blog goes through is exactly what it is that your gut likes to eat. And it turns out that your gut needs resistant starch. Now, resistant starch, I won't go into all of it in this video because it's a pretty large topic, and you can read it in this blog after you're done watching this. But basically, all the microbes in your gut like to eat resistant starch. So this is starch that will not be turned into blood sugar. It's not going to raise your insulin levels. It's not going to get stored as fat. And there's a couple of examples in the blog. One of them is potato starch, not potato flour. And you can start taking this on a daily basis in small doses, and it'll actually pass through the majority of your intestines and essentially feed all of the microbes in your gut. And when these microbes feed on these resistant starches, what happens is they actually convert the starch into something called hydroxybutyrate, which is a ketone ester, and that's just a complicated way of saying a water-soluble fat. And it turns out that all of the intestinal cells, all the cells in your intestine actually prefer to burn ketones as an energy source. And ketones, interestingly enough, are one of nature's most potent anti-inflammatory agents, antioxidants. And so not only is it a fuel source, but it's actually capable of doing immense amounts of healing in your gut as well. And so what was crazy about me introducing like literally a tablespoon of potato starch a day into my diet was that within 24 to 48 hours of commencing a very small amount of potato starch, I was able to turn the bleeding on and off. Not only that, but now my movements went from, originally when I started all of this, when I started squatting, it was like 30 minutes. Then it went down to like 10 to 15 minutes. And then when I introduced resistant starch into the diet, I was literally out of the toilet in 15 seconds, which is like really what you want to be aiming for. No force required to push anything out, everything moving super smoothly, and most importantly, no bleeding. And so it completely transformed my life. And there's different types of starches that you can use. You don't have to use potato starch. Sushi rice is a perfect example of a resistant starch. It's a different type of resistant starch, but basically when you heat rice up and then cool it down, it becomes something called retrograde resistant starch. Anyways, read this blog below if you're dealing with these issues, and try some of the ideas out in here and let me know how it works. Now, I said that there was 3 insights. The third insight that I had, which has had almost the same impact, and probably actually is just compounded all the other impacts from the other 2 insights, was my regular use of fasting. And so I do this meditation retreat where I go away for 10 days at a time, silent meditation called Vipassana meditation, which is a whole other conversation in itself. And while you're there, the volume of food that you eat when you're in a heavy state of meditation drops dramatically. And so I was unable to get resistant starches while I was there at these meditation retreats. And what I noticed is that all the same benefits emerged just through a massive reduction in caloric intake and volume, most importantly. And so I had this insight while I was meditating that maybe humans are just eating too much food. And so after that, I taught myself through that meditation process that fasting was actually pretty easy and cutting down my caloric intake was quite simple. And so since then, I've actually been doing regular 3-day fasts at home, water fasts, so I'm just consuming water. And then the other really big insight was something called intermittent fasting that I've been doing, where I only eat once a day. And so a combination of squatting, the addition of resistant starches into my diet, very small amounts, and cutting down the volumetric, the volume of food that I'm putting through my body a day has pretty much alleviated my issues. Now, if it was just me, we could call it like circumstantial or anecdotal evidence, but I have so many people around me now that have benefited from these 3 insights. Time and time again, they're coming back to me and saying that these ideas have changed their life. And so I woke up this morning, I'm in a fast right now, and I was like, you know what, today's the day to share this with the world. And so I wanted to share this with all of you guys. I think it's really interesting. There's lots of interesting parallels between, outer ecology, how we deal with our landscapes, and inner ecology. And I really feel like one of the main reasons that I grow most of my own food during the summer, most of my own vegetables, and that we're very selective about the farmers that we consume meat from, is because I feel like when we take care of the planet, we end up taking care of ourselves as well. So hopefully you found this insightful. If you do end up getting some success with these ideas and you're struggling with it, please get in touch with me. I'd love to hear your story. Leave any comments below. And thanks so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. And if you're interested in these types of odd ideas, every week's a little bit different. I write a weekly newsletter series called On My Mind. You can sign up to it at vergepermaculture.ca. And every week's a little different. Generally they're permaculture themed, but they kind of go all over the map. And lastly, I just want to share those 2 websites that I was talking to you about. I highly recommend checking out Free the Animal, specifically this primer on resistant starch, and I'll also share a link to this YouTube video called Longevity and Why I Now Eat 1 Meal Per Day. It's very informative, super well done video. I highly recommend it. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you guys next week.